Hi, I'm Steve Weintraub, and I run the website Collider, and I am thrilled to be at the Collider studio, sponsored by Saratoga Water. A huge thank you to Saratoga, because we cannot be here without a sponsor. Sundance is expensive.
It's really refreshing.
And the blue bottles.
Yeah.
Listen, you know the secret though? No BS. It's because of the glass. Plastic makes things taste like shit, and glass makes things taste great.
I agree.
It's why beer is in glass.
Yeah.
Is that recycled blue glass?
I'm going to say it's recycled from Avatar people. And, but anyway, so I'm here to talk about Fairyland, which I thought was fantastic. But before we get into Fairyland, you were mentioning Wiki Feet. And I wanted to find out, where did this come from?
I have a great wiki feed.
Your opening shot in the movie is your bare feet.
That's right.
And that was strategic because we know you have a big wiki feed following.
Yeah.
So
It's what financed the film.
it is exactly what financed the film. Wiki feet.
So, by the way, I appreciate you indulging me with my stupid questions at the beginning. I have a few quick ones. You worked at the very beginning of your career as like an office PA or something on the first Scream movie, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. Yeah, I was like assistant production coordinator on Scream. Yeah, the very original Scream.
Oh, I know. And
Yeah.
so I'm curious, when you were making that, did you have any idea that movie was going to go on to become what it's become?
I had no idea, but I think that the people at Dimension must have had some idea, because they put Drew Barrymore in it at the begining, and she was kind of a hot deal. I mean, well, she still is, but she was a big deal. So, but it was, I thought it was a gig for me. I was working freelance in production. I'd, been out of film school for a few years, and this was a great job. I got to be up in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County, and we would drink wine on the weekends. I made some wonderful friends on that. We just thought it was a blast. We did not know it was going to turn into the franchise that it became, but I have a feeling that some people had an idea, perhaps.
I'm curious for you, when did you decide you wanted to take over Sundance this year with 2 films?
I'm so excited to be here, because Coda, we didn't actually get to come to Sundance, and so everything was online. And so then when I found out that Fairyland and Cat Person were trying, I was like, I really hope that at least one of them could get in, so I could finally go to Sundance. I did not think it would be both, so I'm on cloud 9. I'm very shocked.
Would it be okay with everyone if I spoke about *Halt and Catch Fire* for the next 30 minutes?
No. Huge fan. I love the show, but and I know that you're a huge fan.
This is just me busting your balls.
For sure.
It's just when I talk to Jake Gyllenhaal, all I talk about is Zodiac every single time, and it's just a thing, So I'm going to stop here. I apologize. I have individual questions for you, but a publicist is going to, grab me and say F you. So let's jump in. I thought your movie's fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's also just such an important movie, and it's beautifully told. But no one here who is watching the interview, and a lot of people in the room, haven't seen it yet. So how have you been describing the film to friends and family?
Well, friends and family have been listening to me describe it for the last 8 years. So they all know it very well. It's been a long time in the making. But I would say to somebody, if like an elevator pitch type of thing, I would say this is a father-daughter love story set during a period in America that was on the cusp of changing in so many ways, and we watched them sort of evolve with the times. It's a parallel coming of age story. This is a story of a daughter or a young girl raised by a gay father, and if you know anything about that sort of community back then, a lot of those men that came out of the closet in the 1970s during the gay lib movement were going through sort of a second adolescence, and because they had sort of suppressed that initial adolescence. So it just so happens that his daughter is sort of coming of age as he is coming of age again. So we're watching these two worlds collide and also connect.
It was very. I think you've done this before. I'm just gonna.
That's the first time anyone's asked me that question.
Oh.
So thank you.
7 floors in an elevator.
Yeah, so we are now. We're going up the World Trade. Oh, oops.
For the 4 of you, I'm curious. this is such a beautifully told story, and I can't imagine. What was it like for all four of you? What was it like reading the script for the first time, and what made you say, "Oh my God, I have to be a part of this"?
When I initially read the script the first time, I mean, it resonated with me the first time I read it, and it resonated with me just as much the 50th time I read it. And even like seeing it today, it still resonates. Andrew wrote an incredibly beautiful script, and I know that he had it for a really long time, but the script spoke for itself. It was a really beautiful story, about a father-daughter love story set during the AIDS epidemic, but it more so it's about these two sort of figuring it out and trying to do better and be better and figure out who they are as people. It's just a story that you kind of hear about, but it's not a movie I've seen or a story that I've seen in the cinema before. And so it was original. It was a beautiful story he had written. The cast was incredible. It was a no-brainer. I mean, it was a small movie, but I think we all cleared our schedules to come do this thing. We all really, really passionate wanted to do it.
And I've been attached for 6 years. I think it's 6 years.
Cody was the very first person attached to the movie.
And don't you forget it. I was so enamored of the script and so wanted it to happen, and years went by when it wasn't happening, and I kind of just assumed, well, I'm not going to get to do this. And Andrew and I stayed in touch, and I would kind of hound him every December, I think, like, what's happening? And then it all came together, like it seemed like within the space of a week. I found out that Scoot was doing it, and I instantly became terrified because he's just, I've always seen him as such a phenomenal artist, the kind of actor that you are like, okay, I've really got to bring my A game. And I was at an Oscars party, and when you and I met, and you were like, Fairyland, and I was like, what about it? And you were like, I'm Alysia, and I was like, what? And then it was like all happening. It all came together within the space of like 2 weeks, and we were off to San Francisco and shooting. And it was such an extraordinary experience the whole time. So that's my experience of it.
The whole 21 days that we shot the movie in.
Yeah, it was a whirlwind, but I think that's what's so exciting about independent movie making. It brings out such a rawness on screen, and it's 21 days, and you've got to film young Alysia, old Alysia through loads of years, and it was tough, but everybody just worked so hard together, and it really was a team effort, and I loved every second of it, even though it was hard and we were up against it with time. I loved it. And the story, it was so beautiful. I read the memoir and I read the script and I fell in love with it. And I did actually audition for Andrew before the pandemic. And then I didn't hear, we had a Zoom. And then we
had a Zoom like the first week of the pandemic, didn't we? We were both at our homes. It wasn't called Zoom then, it was called Skype.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I didn't hear anything and I thought, I didn't get it. And then I got a call months later, and I was so excited to be doing it. It's a really beautiful story.
If I can ask, you have a small but important part in the film. But you haven't talked about what drew you to the project, so I'm just curious.
Well, Andrew reached out, and we had a great conversation, and he told me about the memoir, and I read it, and I thought it was beautiful. I've always loved San Francisco in the 70s, particularly in the Castro, the gay liberation movement. I have, my mom's side of the family, they lived there in the Castro during that time. It hits home for me, like that was a very nostalgic sort of era, based on stories I've heard. And I just thought it was a different, there are lots of queer stories being told right now, and it's really important. And it's something that's sort of long overdue. There's more and more characters coming out. There's more and more stories. I feel like, we're at a time where queer stories and visibility are more important than ever. And they're the reason why we have been able to move the needle in the first place. I think the media, TV, film, music, we're the ones actually helping get people comfortable with the queer experience. But this movie in particular was just so interesting because you're kind of colliding the gay liberal movement with a single father raising a child. And I thought it was so interesting to see those things kind of mashed together in such a beautiful way.
You mentioned that you had a tight schedule to make this, and I'm curious, when you were looking at the schedule, what was the day that you had circled, like, how the F are we going to pull this off? And also for the actors, was there a day on the schedule that you were a little bit concerned or nervous about?
I'm trying to think of a day that wasn't that day. It's just so you understand that when you have a 7-year-old, they can only work 5 hours a day. So what we did is we would shoot Nessa Doughtery, who is the wonderful little girl that plays young Alysia. We would shoot her in the mornings, and then she would leave at lunch, and then Emilia would come, and we would shoot her scenes. Now, remember, Scoot has to go from 70s to 80s at lunchtime, so he would have to switch his hair and makeup and everything. And we'd also have to do, our company moves are minor. We shot most of the movie in 2 large homes, 2 big old houses for our interiors. So the company moves were easy, but we would shoot young Alysia in the morning, older Alysia at night. We'd shoot, the morning was on 16 millimeter. The evening, the camera department switched to digital. It was like shooting 2 films, and we always said that. So when you asked that question, if there was one day that was crazy, the day that we shot the gay pride parade in the 70s, it was a heat wave, but also it was like day 2 or 3 of shooting. Yeah, and there were 3 company moves, which is a lot for a movie on our schedule. So that might have been a tough one because we had a couple different locations, and it was all kind of very different. It was a complicated shoot to do, but
you wouldn't have known it. I mean, Andrew handled it so deftly. It was such a punk experience shooting. Like I remember coming in, be like in the makeup room. I'd be in character and I'd come in and there would be Emilia getting her hair done and we'd kind of go off and do something and then Nessa would be going, and the entire time Andrew was so calm and he'd kind of come in with his little screen and his direction was, yeah, so how you feeling? And I was like, yeah, it's good. He's like, okay, yeah, all right then. Like out of the room, you never knew that anything was a problem. He was like, okay, well, yeah, we've got to get this, so let's do it. It was just, it felt like indie filmmaking in the best possible sense, a collaboration with a leader who knew what he wanted and who delivered.
Yeah, no matter how stressful it was, it never showed, ever.
And I have to say, this is my first film. I've been in the entertainment industry for a long time, in other theater and music and stuff. But I was a little apprehensive. I was like, well, I hope that I know what I'm doing, and I hope that they like me and that I don't fuck things up. And I have to say, it was such a breeze. It was so comfortable right away. Andrew was like, just made me feel like everything was going to be fine. I walked onto set and met Scoot. He gave me a big hug and he was like, I'm so excited. I instantly felt like, okay, this is going to be great. I met Emilia. It was just like, it felt very relaxed, and that the family had already sort of been formed, but I didn't feel like an outsider when I walked onto set. And I thought that was really wonderful. I mean, I've seen it the other way.
It also helps giving everyone a $5 bill before you stand on set.
Or 100. Yeah, exactly.
I've done a couple films, and Andrew is a light in a bottle. He's just so wonderful to work with, but also he's wonderful to be around. You want to go get drinks or a dinner with him afterwards. You kind of want to. He's very, very magnetic, and so. It trickles down from the top. Obviously, we all know that. And when you have a leader that's keeps their composure and keeps their creative vision going, and their composure, it's rare. And Andrew, I did it gracefully.
And an extraordinary team of producers as well. I mean, you have Sofia Coppola and you have Megan Carlson, and they were real leaders on this film, and everything just felt like a family experience, and so you knew. I know.
I was like, Sophia, what? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm so sorry.
That was really it. I mean, it was just, as a team, you don't get this often, and it was such a love fest. It was just so easy and gentle and humorous and light, and at the same time, obviously tackling such intense issues. Kudos to Andrew.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm so happy this film was made is there's a lot of obviously younger people that are not familiar with that era, and it always, anytime I think about the late 70s, well, early 80s of San Francisco in the mid 80s, I just think about all the people that were lost to AIDS and who just never had a chance. And it's just a generation of people. And this film shines a light on that story. And so can you talk a little bit about that aspect?
Yeah, it's a little emotional for me. I'm going to pass that on to someone else.
I was not.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a tough one.
I was not educated on the. I mean, I knew a little bit about it, but not to the extent that I know. And the tragedy that came across this community that was totally sidelined after going through a COVID pandemic that doesn't even ring close to what the AIDS. It's like one of the saddest things in the world to know that, like, what if you went through the COVID pandemic and you had nobody? And this community, small community, had a lot of pride, had gained a lot of ground with their movement, only to be. It's just a tragedy. It's so sad. It's just so sad. And that was the one thing that hit me in doing the research for this. I didn't know much about the AIDS. I always grew up in Texas. I was sheltered from it. And having learned a lot about this, I didn't understand. I now realize the tragedy that this community went through, and no one was sticking their hands out to help.
It's a shameful time in America's history, and but one of the reasons why I'm so happy this film was made is because we have to talk about it, and we can't bury these things under the rug, and that's one of the reasons why, one of the many reasons why I thought you did such a fantastic job.
Well, that's also why I made the film, and I didn't mean to not answer your question, but I probably, like so many of us, have a little PTSD from that era, so it's hard for us to go there, so that's why the film is here.
I will say too, like I missed that era by 10 years or so, and but growing up sort of in the shadow of it, like the aftermath of it, the fear that was around sex and homosexuality permeated the 90s, as I was a kid in the 90s, but like you could feel it. Anything that you saw on TV about anything gay was like, everyone was freaked out, because of what had happened. And I think looking at today's community, like the LGBTQ community today, especially young people coming up, there's a lot of the history that we haven't passed on to our community. There's a lot of it that's been lost. A lot of our teachers were taken away from us. A lot of the people that would now be our elders don't exist anymore. And the history that the queer community has been through is really important now more than ever, considering what's going on in the country, considering that, like I said earlier, we're under sort of attack again. We gotta make sure everyone knows what's happened already, and so that we can not repeat our mistakes, and we can build upon what we can learn from it, and come out stronger and more unified.
So I don't want to do any spoilers in the movie, but you two have some very emotional scenes in the third act. And I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about playing those scenes and making them as authentic as you can, because for me, when I was watching, I felt like I was watching real people who are just flawed, but trying to make the best of it. And I thought you both did such an amazing job.
Well, luckily for us, by the time we kind of came to the third act and those really, really emotional scenes, they were at the very end of the shoot. So by that point, I had become really close with Scoot. I'd become close with Andrew. We'd all become really, really close, and we'd developed our characters. And so when it came to those really, really emotional scenes, I was really, really sad. I fell in love with Scoot's Steve, and we also were coming to an end of the shoot, and it was emotional, and I'd learned so much about that time, and it was kind of no acting required. Andrew did really long takes, which I loved, because I felt like I was living as Alysia, and I was in that moment, and it never felt like acting. I never noticed the camera around, especially Greta, the way Greta shot those scenes as well. She kind of just let us be. It wasn't like, okay, now we're going to go closer, now we're going to go close, now we're going to do a wide, now we're going to do this shot. It was just me and Scoot in that moment, and we didn't do it many, many times, which helped, I think, and made it more emotional.
For me, like working with talent like Emilia, you just have to listen. Like it when you work with really talented people, there's less work for you to do, especially in acting. And so just to be present and just listen that's it. Even with Nessa, the little girl, you just sort of really listen to them, and like they're rock stars. Like they will get you there. You know what I mean? If you just stay focused and just listen to them, because they were both. I mean, Nessa did an incredible job. It was her first movie, but you know, Emilia's a pro, and so you know, when you work with somebody like that, it's not work, it's play.
I was going to say you have a fun scene with Nessa. I don't want to spoil it here, but I'm curious what it was like filming a certain scene that is dealing with adult stuff, maybe.
What was really great about, I mean, like just as an aside, you know, indie filmmaking. I got into that bath and it was freezing cold. Do you remember? They were like, the water's warm, it'll be great. And
Well, there was no running water in that house,
Yeah.
so we had to just fill a bathtub with water that was, I don't know, from the hose.
That's right.
Yeah.
So they were like, jump into the bath. It's going to be great. And I was like, this is minus 10 degrees. And you know, I'll say something about that. I remember early on, Scoot and I kind of looking at each other at the start of the film, because Andrew was so gentle that he would kind of, you know, the camera would be off in the distance or something. We'd kind of be doing our thing, and he knew what he wanted, and we were like, we've got all these ideas and we've got all this, and he was just kind of like, no, I want you to be in the distance, and it was the same with the bath scene. He put the camera in a certain place, and I was thinking, you know, there's going to be coverage, there's going to be a close-up, I was going to make all these choices, and he said, no, just sit in the bath and we're just going to do it. And it feels like it was the first take.
It might have been.
Where the ashtray fell in.
We didn't have many takes on this movie because we didn't have time.
No.
So, the ashtray did fall in. That was the first take. Yeah, you're right.
Take.
Yeah.
So it was the shock of, you know, you're kind of dealing with that situation as it's unraveling, and everything just felt so authentic. And Nessa is such a special little soul. You know, she's so vibrant and curious and fun, and so again, it's like Scoot said, you just kind of need to lock in and go.
So Andrew, one of the things that I commend you on, and you touched on it a little bit earlier in the interview, is I like the way the aesthetic of the film and how you use 16 millimeter for the 70s, and and then you shot it completely different once it became in the 80s. Can you talk about the choices you made, why you wanted to do it like that?
It was a very, very conscious decision, and this was something that when Greta, who our DP, is just incredible. We'll all she's amazing. She was one of the most agile, intelligent. I mean, her aesthetic is incredible. But we decided we wanted to make sure that this film sort of matured as our characters matured, if that makes sense. So at the beginning of it, we shoot a lot of it on, the first half, everything with Nessa is on 16 millimeter. And the camera work it's just a little bit more fluid and more verite, and we shoot up a lot. We're looking up at Steve for most of that part, most of Nessa's scenes, and then when we get to those teenage scenes, when it's the 1980s and we introduce Emilia, we transition to digital, and we're looking a little bit more eye-line with Steve at this point. Our shots are still a little messy and playful, but it isn't until we get to the third act where now we're looking down at Steve, and the shots are a lot more stable. They're more sort of conservative compositions, and that was just a really important to me, because this story is told through Alicia's eyes. And it was very important to me that when you get to the end of the film, those early scenes that were shot on 16 should feel like distant memories. And that was really, really important to me, because I was really inspired by looking through my parents' photo albums and just and also being a photographer, and I love looking at old images, and I just felt like how nice would it be by the time, because this film covers a lot of ground. It's 15 years, it's 2 actors playing Alysia. It's a lot to ask of your audience. So I decided I was just going to lean into that. And I want, like I said, by the end of the film, when you're at the end of that third act, all of those memories of the beginning of the movie should feel very distant, like faded photographs. And that was the intent.
Everyone knows who watches any interview I do, I like talking about the editing process, because it's where it all comes together.
Yeah.
And even though you had a limited shoot, and I'm sure limited takes, I'm curious how the film changed in the editing room in ways perhaps you were not expecting.
Oh, I had 2 editors, Peter and Larry, and they were just incredible. And they put together a beautiful editor's cut, or what you call it, or a rough assembly. So as soon as we got back from France, I sort of had the movie mapped out, and they did it exactly like the script. And this was my first film, so it seemed heavy and long and weird, and I was just like, oh my God, but Sophia's the best person to give you advice. She's so great at telling you, calm down, it's not the end of the world, you've got the movie there, that's what they all look like, even though my editors were telling me, no, this story is solid, it's there. What happened is that I decided at one point I wanted to tell this non-linear. And I wanted the whole movie to be a flashback. And I think I was telling you, I went to dinner with Scoot, and he said, how's the editing going? I go, you know what? I need to start with Emilia, and she needs to be looking through boxes and letters, and we need to start going back on her childhood, and we need to do all this. And we played around with that for weeks. And this is the luxury I had, because when you have such a low budget movie and you're editing in somebody's living room, we did have a little bit more flexibility. But my editors let me do that, and they let me work that exercise and get that out of my system. Sophia kept telling me, people gravitated to the story because of your script. You need to stick with the script. That's what worked. And I said, no. I think it has to be nonlinear. And we tried it, and when you don't shoot something nonlinear and you don't write something nonlinear, it's really hard to try and put those puzzle pieces together. I spoke to an editor that had to do that once on a movie, and she said, well, get prepared for reshoots and focus groups and all sorts of stuff, because and you know what, I went back to what the original assembly was, and we just fine-tuned that, and I think it really worked. So, but I was, like I said, I was lucky that I had the time, I could experiment with that, but I think we're much better off.
Something I've spoken to a lot of directors, and they do sometimes some real experimental editing, and sometimes it works, but it's good to have that freedom. So at least you tried it.
Yeah.
And
Or to know that it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So you can move on from it.
100%.
But even with that, the editing in this film, like I saw it for the first time in theaters today, I decided that I would wait. And I mean, it's extraordinary how it moves time periods so seamlessly. Like that scene where Alysia is getting off the bus. I had a moment in the film where I went, like, oh my God, he's so clever. Like just appreciating, this is really moving along. Like this is an it's extraordinarily well paced.
Yeah. You don't understand how clever it was, because you're getting off of a bus, and then you're in a whole nother city where she's walking, and then you're in a whole nother city or a whole nother place of them talking to the guy in the car. Andrew did an insanely good job at being able to put these locations in these things and be able to utilize all these different two-dimensional sort of walls or spaces and stuff, and then sew this thing together. Like you had to have been there to see how impressive it is on an independent film, the way that this thing was sort of and also the producing team to be able to structure that. It really is, for me, like it was phenomenal to be like, wow, you really stitched that thing together like seamlessly.
And the stock footage is so cool too, because that blends in seamlessly too, and it puts you there.
I need to wrap with you guys. I wanted to talk. We can talk at another point more about the film and with more specifics. I'm just going to say congrats on being in Sundance with this film. Congrats on your first film being in Sundance.
Thanks, guys.
Which is crazy. And I thank you so much for coming in. And one more time, because I want to, a huge thank you to Saratoga for being our
Thank
sponsor.
you.
It's delicious. It's kept us
really appreciate
hydrated.
it. Right.
Yeah, very refreshing.
And
we love the blue bottles.
Enjoy Sundance. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here.
so
This is
much.
super fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.